Hey guys, welcome back to the Red Bed. Today I've got 2 hours of real life Reddit stories lined up. Perfect if you're winding down, trying to sleep, or just want something running in the background. And while you listen, I'll be sharing some hardcore gameplay I got today, where I go trick shotting with my friends and start working on a new area to eventually build a base. Also, I'm trying to post these videos daily, so if you're enjoying them, consider dropping a sub. But anyways, kick back, relax, and enjoy. This first story is about a guy who thought it would be funny to prank his girlfriend's mom, only to unleash chaos with one unexpected ringtone. So my girlfriend once told me that her mom had a great sense of humor. She said her mom loved little jokes and playful pranks, and naturally my brain took that as a green light. I figured if her mom liked humor, I could test the limits just a little. One day I was at their house and things were pretty normal. We were just hanging out when her mom asked me to grab her phone from the kitchen. Simple enough, right? I went to get it, but on the way back, an idea popped into my head. I thought it would be hilarious to change her ringtone. Not to a song, not to a funny little tune, but to a goat scream. One of those loud, ridiculous ones that sound almost human. I switched it quickly, handed her the phone back like nothing happened, and went on with the day. At first I didn't even think much about it. I figured she'd get a call eventually, realize what I did, and laugh. That was the plan. Harmless, simple, funny. But then hours passed, and I forgot all about it. Later that evening, the whole family was sitting in the living room. Everyone was relaxed, chatting, sipping tea, and enjoying themselves. It was peaceful, until her phone rang. And instead of a normal ringtone, the most demonic, ungodly goat scream exploded through the house. It echoed off the walls, sharp and loud enough to make everyone jump. Her mom nearly spilled her tea all over herself. My girlfriend screamed because she had no idea what was happening. And me? I just about passed out trying to hold in my laughter. I felt my face turning red as I tried to keep a straight expression, but it was impossible. The look her mom gave me in that moment is burned into my memory. It was that perfect mix of stern and amused. The kind of look that said, "You're lucky I like you." For a split second, I thought I might be in trouble. But then she started laughing. Not just a chuckle, but the kind of laugh where tears start rolling down your face and you can't catch your breath. The whole room cracked up after that, and the tension completely disappeared. From that day on, though, I became the prank boy. Now, every time I walk into their house, her mom greets me with the same warning: "Don't touch my phone." It stuck as an inside joke, and honestly, it worked out better than I could have planned. The prank could have gone either way, but luckily for me, her mom really did have the sense of humor my girlfriend had promised. That's the end of this story. That prank actually turned out kind of perfect. The timing couldn't have been better, and the reaction sounded priceless. What makes it even funnier is how it became a running joke in their family. Sometimes the simplest jokes leave the biggest impressions. This next story centers on a long-running secret. A daughter keeps treating her parents to free coffee with gift cards from an old app, even after the app died, quietly paying for years to keep their joy alive. About 10 years ago, I stumbled onto a strange little app in the Play Store that claimed it would pay in points for watching ads. It sounded like a gimmick, but at the time I was broke enough to try anything that didn't ask for money up front. So I downloaded it, turned the volume down, propped my phone up against a mug, and let the ads roll while I folded laundry or wiped down the kitchen. One ad, then another, then another. It felt silly at first, like I was doing chores for nickels that hadn't been minted yet, but the points kept adding up. After a while, the app opened a feature where those points could be used for gift cards. Starbucks caught my eye. $25 per card felt huge to me. The trick, though, was the restock times. They'd reload gift cards a few times a day. First come, first served. I learned the schedule like it was a second job. If I missed a window, that was it until the next one. Some days I'd tap refresh with a kind of competitive focus, heart thumping when the little number ticked up and the cards appeared. When I snagged one, I'd sit back and breathe out like I'd won a prize on a radio show. After months of steady ad watching, the points total got wild. Millions. 14 million, give or take. That translated to hundreds of dollars in coffee. It sounds ridiculous, but for my parents, it became a little tradition. Every week, I'd show up with drinks and a pastry or two, and I'd wave the barcode at the register like a magician revealing a rabbit. "It's the app," I'd say when they tried to argue. "Totally free." They'd laugh, shake their heads, and tell me to make sure I watch my ads that night. My mom loves a caramel latte, light on the sweetness, with a sprinkle of cinnamon if the barista has it nearby. My dad rotates between a simple hot coffee and a mocha when he's feeling fancy, but he always checks the gift card balance like a coach scanning a scoreboard. He'd ask, "How many points now?" And I'd grin and say, "Plenty." Because for a long time it was true. We'd sit in the car or at their kitchen table, sipping and chatting. Little things, errands, weather, a neighbor's new roof. Life didn't feel heavy in those moments. It felt like a small treat that we all shared and could predict, even when the rest of our week was unpredictable. Eventually, the app changed. Restocks slowed. Then they got rare. Then they stopped altogether. I kept opening it out of habit, like checking the door I already locked. The points were still there, but they might as well have been sand in a glass jar. I waited a while, hoping it would return to normal. It didn't. After 6 really good years, the party ended. I uninstalled the app and sat there with my thumb hovering over the home screen, feeling a little foolish and a little sad. Here's where the secret began. By then, the coffee runs weren't about the app or the points. They were about the look on my parents' faces when I walked in holding a tray. They'd clap, they'd tease, they'd ask how many ads I watched that day. The whole free coffee narrative had become part of our family folklore. If I told them the truth, that I was paying out of pocket now, they would put a stop to it immediately. We never had extra money. They know that. They would say it wasn't sensible. They would worry. And the lightness of the tradition would lose its sparkle. So I decided not to tell them. The next time I visited, I bought the drinks with my own card. I practiced the same little routine, scanned the barcode from an older gift card I still had in my email just for show. Nothing charged to it, just a familiar screen I could flash, and tucked my receipt away. They were delighted in the same way they'd always been. Mom lifted the lid to check that cinnamon sprinkle. Dad gave the foam a tiny, judgy glance, like he was on a panel, and we sat down and lingered. It felt warm and ordinary was precious. From then on, I budgeted for Starbucks the way some people budget for a streaming service. I'd cut back on takeout or hold off on buying a shirt I liked. Some weeks we skipped, some weeks we didn't. If money got tight, I'd time the treat with a small sale or pick simpler drinks. But I kept the rhythm. If they asked about the app, I told them I'd watched my ads that day. If Dad joked about my points total, I said, "Still working on it." He'd chuckle and tell me to keep tapping. Every so often, I wondered if I should come clean. Honesty is my default switch, and I get that itch when I'm not using it. But then I'd drop by with lunch and see their faces glow in that quiet, surprised way. Like the day just got a little brighter. They'd brag about the free coffee to a friend on the phone. They call it our perk, our little trick, the lucky break that never ran out. And the truth is, I liked being the person who kept that lightness going, even if the mechanics had changed. It never felt like a grand sacrifice. It felt like a practical kindness, the kind you can hold in your hand, warm and simple. The cup on the table, the shared pastry, the 20 minutes we spent catching up on small details that turn into big memories when life shifts. Some days we'd sit in the parking lot, people watching. Other days I'd show up unannounced because they'd had a hard week, and I wanted the first thing they tasted to be sweet. Mom would say, "You and those ads," and tap my arm, and I'd smile and take a sip. I still hear them bring it up, even now. They ask whether I watch my ads. They ask if the points went up. They tell me I'm the reason they get the free treat. I nod along and say it's handled. And it is, just not in the way they think. The cost isn't only money, it's attention. It's a promise to keep something small and lovely alive. So here's the secret. The app is gone, the points are 0, and I've been paying for years. But the laughter is the same. The gratitude is the same. The little moment when the lids pop off and the steam rises, still the same. And that's enough for me. That story wraps up here. Quiet generosity hits different when it lives in everyday moments instead of big announcements. The whole keep the magic alive choice says a lot about love without saying much at all. There's something steady about treating joy like a bill worth paying. And honestly, seeing parents light up over a simple coffee might be the best return on investment out there. This next story is about a marriage getting pushed to the edge by a partner's refusal to change his diet after sudden lactose intolerance turns everyday life into a non-stop smelly battle. My husband, Mike, and I have been married long enough to have weathered a lot together. Jobs, family curveballs, the usual growing pains. We're solid, or at least we were, until a very unglamorous problem moved into our house and refused to leave. A year ago, seemingly out of nowhere, Mike developed severe lactose intolerance. Not the mild kind where ice cream just makes a stomach grumble. I'm talking instant chaos. And instead of adjusting, he leaned harder into dairy like it was a dare. Before any of this, milk and cheese were just part of our life. Pizza on Fridays, creamy pasta on Sundays, chocolate tucked into the freezer for late night cravings. When Mike's body slammed on the brakes, he did see his doctor. We got the, yep, it's lactose intolerance confirmation, and picked up Lactaid. At first that felt like a plan. He'd pop a pill, eat the same foods, and hope for the best. The problem was the best didn't really happen. He ate way more dairy than those little tablets could keep up with. And if the food wasn't obviously dairy, like chocolate or a sauce made with butter, he'd forget to take anything at all. Little by little, our home turned into a smell trap. I wish I were being dramatic. I'm not. The sounds were constant, like tiny trumpet blasts following him from room to room. Then there was the odor, which clung to fabric the way cooking smells cling to curtains. I'd wash the sheets, make the bed fresh, and within a day there would be this sour, heavy cloud in the air. I started cracking windows even in the cold. I carried fabric spray like it was a personal accessory. I'd get into the car and feel my shoulders drop because it smelled like the problem we weren't solving. At first I tried to be understanding. Changing a lifelong diet is hard. Mike spent more than 30 years eating dairy with zero consequences. I get that it's a mental shift as much as a physical one. So I stocked the fridge with dairy-free milk, almond-based creamers, coconut yogurt, and cheese alternatives. I cooked meals that didn't require a single splash of regular milk or a pat of butter. I didn't police his plate. I just made the easier choice, the default choice. But the choices he made outside of that were a lot. He'd grab a milkshake on the way home. He'd order extra cheese on a pizza. He'd sneak a chocolate bar after dinner and then shrug when I asked if he'd taken Lactaid. "It's just chocolate," he'd say. 2 hours later, the house would tell a different story. I tried being gentle. I tried being direct. I tried a long car ride with the windows down and a very pointed silence. What made it hard wasn't only the smell, it was the feeling behind it. I kept thinking, if my body reacted to something this loudly and it affected other people this much, I'd change. The fact that he didn't made me feel ignored. It felt like the message was, my routine is more important than your comfort. One night sealed it. I woke up at around 3 in the morning to what sounded like a parade happening beside me. He was asleep and snoring, and the bed was not a peaceful place. The sheets had just been washed that afternoon and already smelled wrong. I lay there staring at the ceiling for 10 minutes and then gave up. I took my pillow to the couch and pulled a blanket over me, scrolling on my phone to distract myself. That's when I typed it all out to strangers on the internet. Every awkward detail, every attempt at a solution, every time I felt dismissed. The morning after I posted, Mike found me making coffee with sleep still heavy in my eyes. Instead of cracking a joke, he looked serious. He said he was sorry for acting like I was exaggerating. He said he read the look on my face the night before and finally understood that I wasn't complaining for the sake of it. I was at the end of my rope. Hearing that didn't undo the week of laundry or the air fresheners lined up like soldiers, but it loosened something in my chest. That day, he made a decision. Not a vague, "I'll try," but a clear, "I'm done with dairy." We boxed up the last of the real cheese, gifted the fancy chocolate to a neighbor, and started reading labels like detectives. The first week was clumsy. He worried about being that person at restaurants, asking servers if there was butter in the sauce or milk in the mashed potatoes. He still carried Lactaid, but as backup, not as a permission slip. And for the first time in months, our house started to smell like itself again. Fresh laundry actually smelled fresh. The couch smelled like fabric, not like a problem we didn't want to name. At work, he already had a routine that helped. He packed vegan protein bars for lunch, which meant he wasn't stress eating a cheese-heavy meal at his desk. At home, I kept cooking dairy-free dinners, and he began to learn which alternatives he genuinely liked. Oat milk and coffee, olive oil instead of butter, sorbet instead of ice cream. It was an adjustment, but it was doable. A few weeks in, something normal happened that felt like a miracle. Quiet. Our house was quiet, our bed was peaceful, and I wasn't bookmarking mattress cleaning guides at 2 in the morning. The air inside the car just smelled like car. I didn't realize how tense I'd been until that tension was gone. Looking back on it now, I see two things. First, his health really did change overnight, and grieving that comfort food was part of the process. Second, my comfort mattered too, and saying so out loud was necessary, even if the conversation was awkward. Once we both stopped treating it like a minor quirk and started treating it like a real health boundary, everything softened. He's been fully dairy-free since the start of the year, and he's proud of that. So am I. The best part is simple. We both get to sleep through the night. That's where the story ends. It's funny how a tiny detail, like what goes on a plate, can quietly run the whole household. The switch flips only when both people decide the problem is real. The most human part here is the hesitation about asking for ingredient details in public. Totally relatable and a little endearing. The quiet at the end says more than any big speech, and it lands in a way that feels earned. This next story is about a college student dealing with a group of kids, climbing a tree to peek into her apartment, and the clever way she made sure it never happened again. Back in the 90s, I moved to Winter Park, Florida for college. I ended up in this little apartment that had a huge tree right behind it. At first, I loved that tree. It completely blocked my view of everything outside, but it also kept the blazing Florida sun from overheating my place. The apartment stayed noticeably cooler, and it gave me a sense of privacy too. Since the tree covered the windows, I didn't really worry about being seen. I could walk around in shorts, in a tank top, or just relax without a second thought. One afternoon, I was inside with a guy I was seeing. Nothing wild. We were just kissing, sitting together and enjoying ourselves, when suddenly I heard laughing and giggling. At first I thought maybe some neighbors were outside, but then I realized the sound was coming from right outside my window. I turned, and to my shock, there were several kids perched up in the tree branches, staring in at us and laughing. I jumped up immediately and started yelling at them. The kids scattered, scrambling down the tree and running off, still laughing. I was horrified. It wasn't just embarrassing. It felt like such a violation of the privacy I thought that tree was giving me. The next day, I went to the apartment office to report it. They listened, but their response was pretty frustrating. They reminded me that the complex technically had a no climbing trees rule, but then they said there wasn't really a playground or much space for kids to play. So in their eyes, there wasn't much they could do to stop them. I walked out of that office annoyed, because the kids had already proven they'd do it again if nothing changed. And sure enough, over the next couple of weeks, they climbed that tree a few more times. Every time I caught them, I shouted, but it only drove them off temporarily. I realized I needed a more permanent solution. That's when the idea came to me. One evening, I went to the grocery store and picked up 2 big tubs of vegetable oil, a pair of dishwashing gloves, a container of honey, and a bag of sugar. It probably looked like the strangest grocery list ever, but I had a plan. I also called the guy who had been with me the first time it happened. He was over 6 feet tall, so I knew he'd be able to help reach the higher branches. After dark, we went outside to the tree. He boosted himself up and, with gloves on, started coating the trunk and as many branches as he could reach with vegetable oil. The whole lower section of the tree became slick and shiny. I made sure he got the areas where kids would normally grab on first, so climbing would be nearly impossible. Then, around the base of the tree, I drizzled honey and sprinkled sugar. The idea wasn't to hurt anyone, it was just to make the area really unappealing. I knew in Florida, that combination was a perfect invitation for fire ants. The next day, I checked the ground carefully. There were footprints in the dirt near the tree, but none leading up into the branches. It looked like the kids had tried jumping up to grab onto the lower branches, only to find them too greasy to hold. And sure enough, after that, I never heard giggles outside my window again. The tree went back to being what it was supposed to be in the first place: shade, privacy, and peace. For the rest of the time I lived there, no one climbed it again. That's the end of this story. That was such a creative fix. It's kind of funny how a few groceries turned into the perfect solution. I like how it wasn't mean-spirited, just clever enough to make the kids give up. Honestly, that tree ended up doing its job better than ever. This next story is about a newlywed husband dealing with non-stop teasing at work, all because his wife packed his lunches a little too thoughtfully. This story comes from my dad, back when he was a newlywed. To set the stage, this was long before I was even thought of. My dad grew up during the Great Depression, and because of the poor nutrition back then, he had really soft teeth. Dental work was just part of his life. Not long after he and my mom got married, he had to go through another round of dental procedures. It wasn't just one trip to the dentist. It was a whole series of visits, and it meant eating was a bit tricky for him for a while. My mom, Sue, had this routine of packing my dad's lunches every morning. He had to leave for work really early, way before she had to be out the door, so it just made sense. Because of the dental work, Dad couldn't really bite into a whole apple anymore. The skins would get stuck, and it just wasn't worth the trouble. So Mom, being thoughtful, peeled the apples, cored them, and sliced them into neat little pieces. That way he could still enjoy them without worrying about his teeth. Now, here's where the problem came in. My dad was a master tradesman in a highly skilled trade. The specific field doesn't matter here, but his work environment definitely does. He was surrounded by a bunch of guys who loved to crack jokes, especially at someone else's expense. They were the kind of loudmouths who always had a running commentary about everything. And once they found out Dad was a newlywed, well, it became their favorite subject. Every single day, he got teased about it. So, imagine Dad sitting down at lunch, pulling out his neat little apple slices, and instantly the jokes started flying. It wasn't just light teasing either. It was relentless. The one that really set him off, though, was when one guy loudly announced, "Whoa, look what Dave's got today. A peeled and sliced apple." You can definitely tell his honeymoon isn't over yet if his wife's doing that for him. Everyone else burst out laughing, making the moment even worse. That night, Dad came home and told Mom all about it. He explained the situation and said, "Sue, you know how you've been peeling and slicing my apples because of the dental work? Well, these guys think you're doing it just because I'm a newlywed, and they won't let it go. I want to wipe that smirk right off his face. Would you keep doing it for me? Not just for now, but for as long as I work there?" My mom didn't even hesitate. She thought it was hilarious and agreed right away. If this was going to shut down the teasing and quietly get back at the guy, she was all in. So that became the new normal. Every single day, for 2 whole years, Mom made sure Dad's apple was peeled, cored, and sliced before it went into his lunch bag. Over time, the teasing started to fade. At first, the loudmouths kept at it, but the more they saw the apple slices day after day, the less it was funny. Eventually, it just wasn't worth mentioning anymore. The jokes ran out of steam, but my parents kept the routine going anyway, almost like it was a shared inside joke between the two of them. Finally, after 2 years, Dad got a new job and was ready to move on. On his very last day with that crew, he decided it was the perfect moment to bring things full circle. Lunchtime came around, and he pulled out his familiar lunch. Sitting right there was his usual peeled, cored, and sliced apple. He turned toward the guy who had started it all, locked eyes with him, and without breaking that gaze, took a slow bite out of the apple slice. Then he said calmly, "Well, I guess my honeymoon never ended, huh?" The room went quiet for a beat. The loudmouth bent his head and stared down at the floor, probably wishing he could disappear. But then, instead of laughing at Dad like they had for years, the rest of the guys all burst out laughing at the jerk. For once, the tables had completely turned. Dad had the last word, and it was perfect. That's the end of the story. I like how subtle that revenge was. Nothing over the top, just patience and consistency until the timing was perfect. Honestly, that guy set himself up by making the joke too many times. And in the end, Dad got the last laugh without even raising his voice. This next story is about a mix-up at a comic convention where someone mistook a fellow shopper for the booth owner and tried to haggle over a rare collectible. Last year, I went to a comic convention, and like usual, I spent a lot of time wandering through the vendor aisles. There's something about being surrounded by rows and rows of collectibles, posters, and figures that makes me feel like a little kid again. The booths were crammed with the colorful displays, walls of Funko Pops stacked almost to the ceiling, shimmering comic covers under plastic sleeves, and shelves full of action figures posed like they were ready for battle. At one booth, I spotted a Funko Pop that caught my eye. It wasn't just any common one you'd see at a regular store. This one was rare, the kind you don't usually see outside of online listings or auctions. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands, debating whether or not I really wanted to spend the money. It was definitely on the pricier side, and I was still going back and forth in my head about whether it was worth it. That's when I suddenly heard a voice calling out behind me, "Miss, Yes, miss. I looked up, and a woman was heading straight toward me. She had this determined look on her face, like she had just found a treasure and wasn't about to let it slip away. Before I could even say anything, she said, "No need to put that Funko on the shelf for others. I'll buy it from your booth." I kind of froze for a second because it took me a moment to realize she thought I was the booth owner. I was standing there holding it, so I guess to her it looked like I was in charge of the merchandise. The funny part was she wasn't joking around. She was already reaching for her bag like she was about to pull out cash. I had to clear things up. I told her, "Oh, I'm actually not buying it, and this isn't my booth." I gently set the Funko Pop back on the shelf and stepped away, trying not to laugh at the misunderstanding. She gave me this kind of confused look, but I figured that was the end of it. A while later, though, I passed by the booth again. To my surprise, the woman was still there, but this time she had actually found the real booth owner. And instead of just buying it outright, she had launched into full-on haggling mode. She was pointing at the price tag, waving her hands a bit, clearly trying to argue it down. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard her say something like, "That's way too high, I'll give you this much instead." The booth owner, though, wasn't having it. He kept shaking his head and saying firmly, "The price is what it's set at. I'm not going any lower." It was kind of funny to walk past because you could feel the determination radiating off her and the absolute refusal radiating off him. I just kept walking, amused by how a simple misunderstanding had turned into a drawn-out bargaining session. That story ends there. There's something really entertaining about watching people try to haggle at places where prices are clearly set. It makes conventions feel like a mix of a flea market and a retail store all rolled together. Honestly, I respect the booth owner for standing his ground, because collectors know their stuff, and part of me can't help but laugh, because being mistaken for the seller in the first place would have thrown me off too. This next story is about a man trading in his truck for a new SUV, only to have the dealership lie, play games with his contract, and even refuse to give his old vehicle back. So this just happened to me, and honestly, it was one of the wildest car buying experiences of my life. I went to a Nissan dealership because I wanted a Pathfinder, and I had it narrowed down to a very specific car. I'm talking down to the VIN number, the exact trim, color, everything. We did all the paperwork on that vehicle and even traded in my truck as part of the deal. They told me it would be delivered the next day, and I thought it was all squared away. The next afternoon, I get a call from the dealership. They tell me the porter went to pick up my Pathfinder, but apparently it had tailgate damage, so they sent it back. Right away, I reminded them that I wanted that exact car in that exact trim and color. It wasn't just about getting a Pathfinder, it was about getting the one I had chosen. Instead of making it right, they tried to push me into a different deal. They offered me a lower trim version of the Pathfinder, but at the same price we had already agreed to. That didn't sit right with me at all. Later, they called again, this time trying to spin it as great news. Now they were saying the car was in transit and would arrive in 5 to 10 days. At that point, it was clear to me that they were playing games. I told them I wanted to cancel the deal altogether because they had lied just to push me into something I didn't want. I asked for my truck back. That's when things got way worse. They told me they didn't even have the keys to my truck anymore. I couldn't believe it. So my wife, our dog, and I drove back to the dealership to get my property and sort this out. When we got there, the sales manager came out and the whole thing just went downhill. He was rude, unprofessional, and refused to let me talk to the finance manager. The kicker is, the finance manager was literally sitting right there in his office. We could see him through the glass, but the sales manager kept insisting he wasn't available. At one point, the sales manager mocked me by saying, "No one put a gun to your head to sign the contract." And he even made a 2-finger gun gesture when he said it. It was so unprofessional, it almost didn't feel real. Then he told us we had to leave because it was private property, even though all I wanted was my truck back and a copy of my contract. So there we were, me, my wife, and our dog, standing outside the dealership, waiting for the cops to arrive so we could get my property back. Eventually, the police showed up and helped us secure a copy of the contract. But my truck? Nowhere to be found. They kept it, and we were left driving home in a loaner car that smelled awful, crammed with all my work stuff, and a very grumpy dog in the back seat. I couldn't believe it had escalated that far. A simple car trade-in turned into a standoff with the dealership, complete with police involvement. By the end of it, I was drained, frustrated, and stuck with a contract I didn't even want anymore. The dealership might technically own my truck now, but the whole situation left such a sour taste in my mouth that I honestly don't even want the Pathfinder anymore. That story wraps up here. Man, that dealership sounds like a circus. It's wild how quickly something as simple as buying a car can turn into a full-blown nightmare. The part about having to call the cops just to get basic paperwork is ridiculous. Honestly, the whole situation feels more like a bad sitcom than a real transaction. This next story is about a lazy coworker who tried to dump her bank deposit duty on someone new, only to regret it when the task didn't turn out the way she expected. I work at a small liquor store, and one of my coworkers, I'll just call her A, has always been difficult. She's rude, lazy, and acts like she's the manager, even though she's definitely not. People have quit because of her, and customers have stopped coming in during the mornings just to avoid her. That's the kind of reputation she has. Now, one of her actual responsibilities is to take the daily deposit to the bank whenever the owner isn't available. It's a simple enough task, but it's technically hers. Around the time this story starts, I had just gotten my driver's license. Like, literally only about a week earlier. I was brand new to driving and still trying to get comfortable, especially because there was a lot of road construction around town that made driving a little nerve-wracking. So one day, A throws the deposit bag down in front of me and snaps, saying she's sick of going to the bank and I need to do it instead. I remember looking at her like, wait, what? I'd only had my license for a week. I told her I just wasn't ready to handle it yet. We argued a little, and I explained I'd feel better if I could have at least a day to plan, maybe ask someone to ride with me so I didn't panic around all the construction. She was furious, but eventually I did take the bag to the bank, and once I realized it wasn't that bad, I kept doing it, and honestly, I ended up liking it. It got me out of the store for a little while, gave me a break from stocking shelves and dealing with customers, and made the shift feel shorter. For about half an hour each day, I could just listen to the radio in the car and have some time to myself. It became a nice little routine. Here's where the funny part comes in. After a while, A seemed to forget how much of a break that bank trip could be. She started offering to take the deposit herself again. She'd say things like, "Oh, I'll go to the bank today. You don't have to." Every time she said that, I'd just shrug and tell her it wasn't a big deal, that I didn't mind doing it. And I didn't. She had been the one to push me into it, and now I actually preferred it that way. It got under her skin so much that she complained to our manager about it. She tried to spin it like I was hogging the bank runs or doing something wrong, but our manager already knew the whole backstory, that I had only just gotten my license, and A was the one who had forced me to start driving the deposit in the first place. The manager just looked at her and said, "You asked her to do it. She likes doing it. I don't see the problem." And that was that. A was stuck with the situation she created, and I was happy to keep the task. She ended up resenting me even more, but honestly, she already hated pretty much everyone except the store owner. For me though, it felt like the smallest but most satisfying kind of payback. After having to put up with her attitude every day, a little malicious compliance went a long way. That's where this story finishes. That one made me laugh a little. It's funny how something that was meant as a punishment ended up being kind of a perk instead. The way she complained about it later shows how quickly people forget their own choices. Sometimes the smallest twists at work end up being the most satisfying. This next story is about a young worker whose creepy coworker wouldn't stop harassing her, and the fallout when he suddenly got fired and everyone wanted to know why. At my job, there are microphones set up all around the workplace. They pick up everything, every single word people say. It makes the place a little tricky because gossip is basically impossible. If you so much as whisper, it gets picked up. Aside from that though, the job is easy, and for the most part, I actually enjoy working with the people there. When I first started, there was a coworker named Eric. At first he seemed fine, kind of chill, maybe a little too talkative, but nothing I thought was a big deal. That changed over time. He started crossing lines, making comments, and flirting with me constantly, even after I told him directly that I had a boyfriend. He somehow got my number and sent me a few texts. I ignored them, hoping he'd take the hint, but he didn't. Instead, the comments got bolder. He told other coworkers that I was hot, and sometimes he'd make remarks about my body right to my face. It was uncomfortable, and it didn't stop no matter how uninterested I acted. One night, things escalated to the point where I couldn't just brush it off anymore. I had mentioned, casually, that I was turning 18 soon. He grinned and said he was so excited because it meant I could join an adult website. Then he started asking me gross, invasive questions, stuff like whether I ate pineapple or drank cranberry juice, followed by a comment about how he knew it tasted good. Later, when I bent over to grab something, he actually made a remark about the color of my underwear. On top of all that, he barely worked that night. He spent most of the shift wandering around on his phone. The next day, my boss called me into the office. He pulled up camera footage and explained that the microphones had picked up everything from the night before. He was serious, almost stern, when he said, "When I'm done listening to these, Eric may not have a job. What he's saying does not belong in a workplace." Hearing that was both relieving and surreal. I didn't have to convince anyone it had happened. The microphones had caught it all. Later that day, Eric came into work like nothing had happened. Management called him into the office, and within a few minutes, he walked back out, grabbed his stuff, and left without saying a word. That was it. He was gone. Of course, this stirred up the whole workplace. People started whispering, asking each other why Eric had been fired. Since I was there during the shift that got him in trouble, my coworkers turned to me for answers. I told them what I knew, which was the truth. He wasn't doing his job, and he was harassing me. Word got back to Eric. He DM'd me not long after, and it was as bitter and angry as you'd expect. He accused me of lying about him, insulted my appearance, and even threw in a threat at the end. I can't repeat exactly what he said because of the rules where I work, but it was nasty. The thing is, I don't actually feel unsafe. He's just mad that the truth got out, and now everyone knows what kind of person he really was. Still, part of me wonders if I was wrong for telling people, since technically I don't know the exact wording management used when they fired him. But deep down, I'm almost certain that what happened that night was the final straw. That story wraps up here. That one leaves kind of a heavy feeling. It's frustrating how someone can make a workplace so uncomfortable just by ignoring boundaries. At least in this case, there was clear proof, and it didn't get brushed aside. It makes you realize how important it is when people actually take action on stuff like that. This next story is about a woman whose coworker kept mocking her lunches, and when she turned to her boyfriend for support, he chose to side with the coworker instead. I'm 26, and for context, I love food. I love trying out different meals that friends recommend, especially dishes from other cultures. It's something I look forward to each week, bringing something new to work for lunch. I've had jollof rice, chicken curry, jjajangmyeon noodles, and plenty of other things that make the break room smell incredible. For me, food is not just food. It's exciting, and it connects me to different experiences. But at my job, there's this coworker who's 30, and for some reason, she decided to make my lunches her running joke. Every time I brought something in, she had something to say. Sometimes it was about the smell, sometimes about how it looked. She'd throw in comments like, "Why can't you just eat normal food?" Or, "That's weird." At first I tried to laugh it off, but it wasn't funny after a while. It was constant, and it chipped away at the enjoyment I felt about something that should have been simple. Eventually, I told her to stop. I said it calmly, but firmly. I wanted her to understand that it wasn't just playful teasing. It felt like disrespect. She looked surprised, maybe even a little annoyed, but I felt better finally standing up for myself. Later on, I was venting to my boyfriend about it. We'd been together for 10 months, and I thought sharing what had happened would make me feel supported. Instead, his reaction completely threw me. He shrugged and told me I was making a mountain out of a molehill. He said I was overreacting, and that my coworker was probably just joking. I remember staring at him, waiting for him to switch gears, but he didn't. I tried explaining how it felt to me, that it wasn't a joke, it was constant disrespect. He brushed me off again, saying, "You're always so sensitive." That stung more than anything my coworker had said, because from my boyfriend, it felt like betrayal. The one person who was supposed to be in my corner couldn't even be bothered to take me seriously. In that moment, I didn't hesitate. I told him it was over. We'd only been dating for 10 months, and if this was how he handled something small, I couldn't imagine leaning on him when something bigger came along. I walked away. Now I keep replaying it in my head. Part of me feels strong for standing up for myself and cutting ties with someone who wasn't really there for me. But another part of me wonders if I was too harsh, too quick to end things. Maybe I should have given him another chance, or explained it differently. Still, when I go back to that conversation, I can't shake the feeling of being dismissed by someone I cared about. And that, more than anything, is what pushed me to walk away. That's where the story ends. That breakup makes a lot of sense to me. It's not really about the food or the coworker. It's about whether someone has your back or not. When you feel dismissed like that, it cuts deeper than most people realize. Honestly, sometimes 10 months is long enough to see if someone's the right fit. And in this case, it sounds like she trusted her instincts. This next story is about someone dealing with a neighbor who keeps opening their mail, insisting it's all just a mistake, even after it's happened multiple times. I've reached the point where I don't even know if I'm more frustrated or creeped out. My neighbor across the hall is 27, and for some reason, he has a habit of accidentally opening my mail. The first time it happened, I thought it was just an honest mix-up, but after the fourth time, it feels like a pattern, and I can't just brush it off anymore. It started a few months ago with a small package. I'd ordered a book, and the tracking showed it had been delivered. But when I checked, my mailbox was empty. A few days later, there was a knock on my door. My neighbor stood there holding the package, smiling, saying he had taken it by mistake and wanted to apologize. I didn't think too hard about it. It seemed plausible enough, and it was only a book, so I just let it go. Then came the credit card. I had a new one sent out, and just like before, it disappeared. Later that same night, my neighbor showed up again. This time, he admitted he'd opened the envelope, saw the card, and only then realized it wasn't his. He had my full name and address right there in front of him, but still went ahead and opened it. That one made my stomach twist. A credit card isn't just mail, it's access to my life. I canceled the card immediately and had the new one shipped to a P.O. box. From then on, I told myself I needed to be on high alert, but things didn't stop there. A little while later, my mom sent me a big package. It wasn't subtle. She'd written my name on it in giant, bubbly letters that were impossible to miss. Still, my neighbor ended up with it. His excuse this time was that he was expecting a package from his mom, and he thought it was his. The excuse sounded flimsy, but I didn't want to start a fight, so I just nodded and took it back. Today was the tipping point. I've been waiting on a postcard from a friend. She always writes my name in her distinct handwriting and usually adds a funny drawing on the back. I went to check my mailbox, and it wasn't there. 10 minutes later, there was a knock. My neighbor stood there holding the postcard, saying it had ended up in his box. Except our mailboxes are separate, clearly labeled, and right next to each other. It wasn't a complicated setup. There's no way he could have grabbed it by accident without noticing. I took the card, but this time I didn't even try to make small talk. I just stared at him, wondering what exactly he thought he was doing. At this point, it isn't just about mail. It's about boundaries. It's about trust, and the fact that I feel uneasy every time I see him in the hallway now. I don't know what his deal is, and I don't want this to blow up into some huge fight, but I also can't keep pretending it's normal. Part of me wants to confront him and make it absolutely clear he has to stop. Another part of me feels uneasy about how he might react if I push back too hard. For now, all I know is this can't keep happening. That story ends there. That neighbor sounds way too comfortable crossing lines. After the first or second mistake, it's hard to believe it's unintentional anymore. The part with the credit card especially feels shady. It's one of those situations where the pattern is scarier than any single incident. This next story is about a temporary manager who tried to enforce pointless rules about timesheets, only to find his own stubbornness backfiring on him. At my workplace, timesheets are a routine thing. Every 2 weeks on Friday, we have to fill them out before close of business, so Payroll can process them first thing Monday morning. It's not complicated. Our regular manager, who was a really easygoing woman, had a smooth system. She'd collect and sign them Friday morning, send them to Payroll before 5 o'clock, and everything ran like clockwork. Then she went on leave because her daughter was having a baby. While she was out, the company brought in a younger guy to fill in as acting manager. From the first week, it was obvious he had something to prove. He wasn't just strict. He came off like a total jerk, always looking for ways to remind us that he was in charge. One of the first things he changed was how we handled timesheets. He decided we weren't allowed to complete them until after we had worked our full fortnight of hours. In his words, How can you report hours you haven't worked yet? The problem with that was obvious. It meant we had to wait until the end of the day on Friday to finish them, then bring them to him for signing, and then try to get them to payroll. Except payroll closes at 5 sharp, which meant our timesheets didn't even make it in until Monday morning, which delayed everything. We weren't exactly thrilled about this, but since he was the manager, we went along with it. At first we just tried to do it quickly, but then we realized something. If he wanted us to fill them in after hours, then he had to stay after hours to sign every single one. Suddenly, his rule turned into extra work for him, not us. So we started taking our time. On Fridays, a bunch of us would hang around anyway, because there's a bar across the street that does happy hour from 6 to 7. Instead of rushing, we'd chat, laugh, and slowly fill in our timesheets. He'd be stuck sitting there, waiting for everyone to finish, and the look on his face was priceless. One week, we didn't hand them in until right before 6 o'clock. He was furious, practically pacing in his office. This dragged on for about 6 weeks. Every pay cycle, it was the same story. Payroll delayed, employees annoyed, and him getting angrier by the day. Eventually, something must have been flagged higher up, because the issue caught someone's attention. Our whole department wasn't getting paid on time, and when payroll dug into it, the problem was obvious. It all traced back to him and his new rule. It didn't take long for the company to act. He was quietly removed, and one of my coworkers was asked to step in as acting manager until our real boss returned. Things went right back to normal, and timesheets stopped being a headache. That's the end of this story. That manager really set himself up. It's funny how his own rule ended up inconveniencing him more than anyone else. The fact that the whole department's pay got delayed just shows how unnecessary his change was. Honestly, watching him stew while everyone took their time sounds like the most harmless kind of payback. This next story is about a thrift store trip that turned into a showdown when a reseller claimed dibs on items she had walked away from. A few weeks back, I went to Goodwill just to browse around, maybe find something useful for the house. I wasn't expecting drama, but thrift stores sometimes bring out interesting situations. As I was walking through the aisles, I spotted a really nice set of wooden plates and 2 matching bowls. They were simple, but beautiful, and more importantly, I could actually use them. The catch was that a woman was already standing in front of the dishes. She had her phone out and was loudly complaining about how she couldn't find a maker's mark on the bottoms since they were blank. To me, it looked like she was one of those resellers. Her cart was already piled high with glassware and even had a leather jacket sticking out. I went up and politely asked if she was planning to buy the dishes. She snapped at me, glared, and said yes, basically telling me to get lost. I didn't push it. I just said, okay, no need to be rude, and walked off to look elsewhere. A little while later, I circled back and noticed she had wandered over to the book section. Her cart was nowhere near the dishes, and they were still sitting untouched on the shelf. At that point, I figured she wasn't serious about them. So I picked them up and put them into my cart. Not long after, she came back and saw me with the dishes. That's when things exploded. She started freaking out, saying those were from some super high-end artist and that she had planned to buy them. I reminded her that she'd left them behind. If she really wanted them, she should have put them in her cart. Instead of accepting that, she actually grabbed my cart and started pulling things out of it. She went straight for everything I had. A hoodie called the Comfy, and some vintage Pyrex in a collectible pattern. She yelled about how people like me take money away from good resellers like her, and that she was losing sales because regular shoppers actually buy things to use instead of to flip. By then, I'd had enough. I told her to take her hands off my stuff. An employee stalking nearby finally came over to ask what was going on. The woman tried to claim I had stolen items from her cart, but it backfired. Another employee had already wheeled away the cart she abandoned in the book section and was putting her things back on the shelves. The moment she realized her cart was gone, she panicked, dropped my stuff, and ran off after the employee to try and get it back. I looked at the first worker, who just waved me on like it wasn't worth the hassle. So I walked out with my purchases, including the wooden plates and bowls I came for. Later, I told some friends about what happened. Surprisingly, a couple of them said I should have just given her everything, since reselling is technically her job, but they only seemed to take that side once they realized the hoodie I grabbed was worth around $50. That story wraps up here. That reseller really underestimated how wild she came across. Grabbing someone else's cart is already crossing the line, but yelling about lost sales in a thrift store just makes it sound even more ridiculous. It's almost funny how her whole plan unraveled the moment her abandoned cart got taken away. Honestly, it feels like she ended up creating her own mess from start to finish. This next story is about a young guy who challenged his 60-year-old neighbor to a jog, only to find out the man was a seasoned marathon runner who completely humbled him. I'm 24, and I've always thought of myself as reasonably fit. I go to the gym maybe twice a week, and I can push myself through a 5-kilometer run without feeling like I'm dying. At least that's what I believed before this whole thing happened. My neighbor Bob is this quiet, 60-year-old guy who spends most mornings puttering around his garden. He wears these ancient-looking running shoes, faded track pants, and always seems relaxed. One Monday morning, I saw him outside stretching. Feeling cocky, I called out, "Hey Bob, going for a walk? I could join you sometime for a real run." I thought I was being funny, but he just smiled and said, "Son, I go every morning at 5:30. You're welcome to join tomorrow." Now, my pride couldn't resist. I laughed and suggested, "How about we make it interesting? Whoever runs further buys breakfast." Bob chuckled and replied, "Okay, but I usually do 10 kilometers. Is that all right?" 10 kilometers didn't sound too bad. I'd done 5 plenty of times, so how much harder could it be? With full confidence, I said, "No problem, Bob. See you at 5:30. The next morning, I showed up in all my flashy gear. Brand new Nike running clothes, AirPods in my ears, fitness watch on my wrist. I looked like I was ready for a commercial shoot. Bob showed up in the same faded outfit as the day before, carrying a little water bottle and wearing shoes that looked older than me. We started jogging at a steady pace, chatting casually. By 2 kilometers, I was feeling great, convinced Bob would be tapping out soon. At 4 kilometers, I was still confident, but my breathing had gotten heavier. By the 5-kilometer mark, though, reality started to hit. I was properly winded, while Bob kept talking about his garden as if we were strolling in the park. At 6 kilometers, I was in trouble. My watch beeped warnings about my heart rate, and every breath felt harder. Bob looked over and asked, "Everything okay, son?" He wasn't even out of breath. My pride made me say, yeah, all good, even though I was wheezing. By 7 kilometers, I was dying. My legs felt like blocks of concrete. Sweat was pouring off me, and I swear I was questioning my life choices. Bob, still jogging easily, started talking about his marathon training. That's when I gasped out, "Marathon training?" He nodded and said, "Oh yes, I've got the Boston Marathon in April. This will be my 15th one. 15 marathons." My jaw nearly hit the pavement. At 8 kilometers, my body just gave out. I stopped dead, hands on my knees, gulping air like a fish out of water. Bob jogged in place, perfectly calm, and asked if I wanted some water. He even had extra, clearly expecting this exact moment. Then he smiled kindly and said, "Let's head back. We can do the full 10 another day when you're ready." That walk back was the longest and most humbling 20 minutes of my life. By the time we got breakfast, I could barely lift my coffee cup without my hands shaking, while Bob demolished a full diner spread like nothing had happened. The cherry on top came when we got back. His wife was outside watering the plants. She looked up, smiled, and called out, "How was the run with Marathon Bob?" That's when it clicked. The whole neighborhood already knew him as this legendary runner. And here I was, the kid who thought he could show him up. For the next few days, I could barely walk. My legs felt like jelly, and every step reminded me of my mistake. Meanwhile, Bob jogged past my window, waved cheerfully and shouted, "Ready for round 2, son?" I pretended I was asleep. That story ends there. That might be one of the funniest ways to get humbled. The way Bob just kept jogging like it was nothing makes the contrast even better. It's wild how some people carry these low-key talents, and no one realizes until a challenge comes up. The whole Marathon Bob nickname really seals the deal. That's not going away anytime soon. This next story is about an older man at a vaccination clinic who tried to boss everyone around, only to get put in his place in a way that left even the nurses laughing. I had the day off and decided to use it to get vaccinated. It seemed like a good plan. Get the big stuff out of the way early so the rest of the day would feel lighter. When I arrived, there were about 10 of us already gathered, most of us older folks, sitting in the warm lobby near the vaccination stations. The vibe was relaxed. We were quietly chatting about the line the day before, who showed up first this morning, and how long each of us had been waiting. In the middle of this calm little conversation, one man suddenly cut in. He said, "Well, it doesn't matter who was here first, it's who's first in line outside that matters." A woman who had been sitting patiently for nearly an hour responded politely, "I don't think so." That's when he snapped at her. He turned with his sharp glare and barked, "I wasn't talking to you. Mind your own business." Then, without another word, he marched up to the information desk, barked a few questions at the poor staffer there, and stormed outside without telling anyone what he learned. The rest of us just sat there in stunned silence, staring as he left. After a moment, I got up and said, "Well, I guess I'll go ask too," since I was one of the more mobile people there. The staff explained that yes, the line would eventually be formed outside, so we all gathered up and moved. But as it turned out, his big declaration wasn't really important. With the 8 vaccination stations, the first batch of 8 people all went in together, and the second group followed right after. On top of that, anyone with mobility issues got priority so they wouldn't have to stand out in the drizzle. Basically, all his bluster didn't matter at all. I ended up in the second batch. While I waited, I struck up a pleasant conversation with a woman who had a walker with her. Even though she was further back in the line, she was taken in the first group, which made total sense. I didn't mind waiting a few extra minutes. When it was my turn, I noticed the rude man was nearby, already seated but still making trouble. He was arguing with his nurse while I was going through my screening. As if that wasn't enough, he twisted in his chair to butt into my process, saying loudly, "Yeah, they're going to make you come back to get a booster. Can you believe this?" At that point, I couldn't resist. I looked right at him and said, just as clearly as I could, "What was it you said to us while we were waiting? I wasn't talking to you. Mind your own business." Then I shifted my hip so I was physically blocking his view of my nurse. He had a choice, face forward or stare straight at my backside. My nurse had to hide a laugh by pretending to cough into her elbow. His nurse? She completely lost it. She actually had to stand up and walk away so she wouldn't burst out laughing in his face. Meanwhile, my own process went smoothly. I kept calm by reminding myself of the little mantra I always use. I've done worse to myself with bigger sewing needles. Honestly, my nurse was excellent. The screening took longer than the actual jabs. By the time I was finished, the rude man was still sitting there, being lectured by someone. He hadn't even gotten his first shot yet. I walked out, knowing he was likely pushed back to a later batch, maybe even the third. And best of all, I still had plenty of time afterward to grab a nice breakfast with my family. That's where this story finishes. That whole moment with the nurse's breaking character is hilarious. The way his own words got turned back on him makes it even better. Sometimes the smallest comeback ends up being the most satisfying. And honestly, breakfast afterward feels like the perfect ending to a day that started with so much unnecessary drama. This next story is about a clever dog who figured out a sneaky way to trick their owner into giving extra walks. I've got a German Shepherd mix, and let me tell you, she's smart enough that it's not always a blessing. Sometimes it's actually a bit of a problem. Since I work from home, she knows our routine. A short walk during my lunch break, and then another one after I finish work for the day. That's it. When she was younger, she would constantly bug me for more. She'd whine, paw at me, bring me her leash, basically throw every trick in the book at me to get my attention. At first it was cute, but after a while it started interfering with my job. I had to ignore her during the day, and eventually it seemed like she finally got the idea. The begging stopped. At first I was proud of her. I thought, wow, she actually understands the schedule now. But then I noticed something strange. A few weeks ago, right around 11:45 in the morning, she suddenly started drinking a ton of water. Not just a sip here and there. I'm talking about draining her entire bowl, then looking at me like, well, aren't you going to refill it? I didn't think too much of it at first. I just assumed she was extra thirsty. But within minutes of finishing all that water, she'd go to the back door and start doing her "I need to pee" dance. Anyone who's had a dog knows what that looks like. Shuffling around, tail wagging, giving those expectant looks. And of course, I can't ignore that. She's house-trained and hasn't had an accident in years. So, I'd let her out into the backyard. She'd trot out, squat down, and pee. But it was always just this tiny little amount. Then she'd walk straight to the gate that leads to the front path and stand there wagging her tail, doing the same little dance. And of course, that's her walk signal. It's like she was saying, well, Since we're already outside, may as well go all the way, right? At first, I didn't catch on. I figured maybe her bladder just wasn't holding up like it used to. But then it started happening in the afternoons too. Around 4 o'clock, right before I wrap up work, she'd do the same exact routine. Drink a ridiculous amount of water, wait 15 minutes, then make it look like she urgently had to go outside. The day it all finally clicked was almost funny. I happened to glance over while she was heading to her water bowl. She paused, looked back at me to see if I was watching, then very deliberately started gulping down water. It wasn't thirst, it was strategy. She had literally figured out how to manufacture her own bathroom emergencies just to trick me into walking her earlier than usual. She wasn't begging anymore because she had invented this new system. And honestly, it worked. Now when I see her trying it, I just laugh. I usually give in and take her out for the walk anyway, because at this point, I'm more worried that she's going to overdo it with the water and cause herself some kind of health issue. She knows it too. She's got me wrapped around her paw, and she knows exactly how to play the game. That story wraps up here. That's next level manipulation from a dog. It's wild how she basically outsmarted the whole schedule system. It's also kind of funny that the owner gave up trying to fight it. Honestly, it feels like that dog runs the house at this point. This next story is about someone battling their own issues, who still push through interviews, only to land a remote job with a salary far beyond what they ever expected. For a long time, I was stuck in the same graphic design job in Kentucky. I'd been there for 9 years, basically ever since graduating. My salary was $38,000 a year, which might sound okay in some places, but even where I lived, it felt like I was stuck at the bottom. I had been asking about raises for years, hoping that my experience and loyalty would mean something, but management made it clear they had no intention of paying me more. I finally accepted that reality, and around September, I started applying for other jobs. At first, I had low expectations. Kentucky ranks as one of the states with the lowest average incomes, so I figured anything slightly higher than what I was making would feel like a win. I got through a handful of interviews, but nothing came of them. The best offer I received wasn't even much better than what I already had. That was discouraging, but I kept trying. I pushed my search into the new year, filling out applications, polishing up my portfolio, and sending things out wherever I could. By April, though, things hit a wall. My depression and anxiety flared up, and the idea of preparing for interviews felt overwhelming. It wasn't just nerves. It was this heavy dread that if I went to another interview and failed, it would completely wreck what little stability I had left. I was ready to stop altogether. Then one afternoon, I got an email inviting me to interview for a remote designer position with a company based in another state. My first instinct was to reject it and cancel. I was terrified that even a single bad conversation would set me back mentally. But my partner stepped in. They told me, "What do you have to lose? Treat it like practice." That reminder helped me shift my mindset just enough to agree. I went to the first call reluctantly. The interview itself wasn't perfect. I wasn't dazzling anyone, but something about the recruiter stood out. They were kind, easy to talk to, and genuinely made me feel comfortable. By the end, I was actually excited about the company. Then came the shocker. The recruiter said the role paid somewhere between $65,000 and $70,000. I had to stop myself from showing how wide my eyes went. I had never even imagined crossing the 55,000 mark anytime soon, and here I was, suddenly in reach of something much bigger. A couple of weeks later, I heard back. They wanted a second interview. By that point, my new medication had finally started working, and I was in a much better mental state. I went in more prepared, calmer, and more myself. That round went great. After that, they scheduled 2 more conversations with different members of the team. Each one left me feeling better about the job and the people. Finally, the email came. An offer letter. $75,000 a year. I stared at the number for a while, rereading it, making sure it wasn't a mistake. Then I accepted on the spot. I start in 2 weeks. It still feels surreal when I think about it. I was ready to give up, and yet the one interview I almost turned down changed everything. That's where this story finishes. That salary jump is massive, but what really stands out is how close this almost didn't happen. Depression has a way of convincing people that trying isn't worth it, and then life throws a curveball like this. It's a reminder of how wild opportunities can show up when least expected. Honestly, It's just nice to hear about someone catching a break. This next story is about a teacher dealing with a student who refused to do any work but still demanded to be passed, showing just how entitled some people can act. I've been teaching for a few years now, long enough to notice some shifts in how students approach school. Every new year brings a different group, a different energy, but lately I've started seeing something that honestly leaves me scratching my head. It's this casual, almost bold sense of entitlement that some students carry, like the rules don't apply to them. A few days ago, I had one of those moments that really drove it home. There was a student in my class who, for weeks, hadn't turned in a single assignment. Not one. No homework, no projects, nothing. At first I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I thought maybe something was going on at home, or maybe they were overwhelmed. So I waited a little while before bringing it up directly. When I finally followed up, I expected at least an explanation. Something like, I've been sick, or I'm dealing with family issues. I would have even accepted a quick apology. Instead, the student looked me straight in the eye and said, "Ma'am, can you just pass me anyway? I'm stressed and it's your job to understand." I'll be honest, I was stunned. The confidence in that request was wild. They hadn't even attempted the work, and instead of asking for help or trying to catch up, their solution was for me to just hand over the passing grade. I took a deep breath, tried to keep my voice calm, and explained that effort is part of learning. It's not just about getting a grade. It's about the process, the practice, the growth. The student listened for a second, then rolled their eyes and said, "It's not like grades matter in real life." That was the moment I realized how deep this mindset runs. I get that grades aren't everything. Life is more than numbers on a transcript. But what bothered me was the attitude, the expectation that they could put in zero effort and still walk away with the same result as someone who worked hard. I'm all for supporting students when they're struggling. I've given extensions, I've offered tutoring, I've sat with kids one-on-one when I knew they needed extra help. That's part of the job, and I don't mind doing it. But what I can't wrap my head around is this idea that everything should just be handed over, no matter what. It wasn't just a one-off either. I've noticed more students with this same kind of outlook lately. Some younger coworkers have even mentioned seeing it in the workplace too. People expecting promotions, raises, or praise without doing the work that usually leads there. It feels like something's shifting, and I'm still figuring out how to handle it. Looking back on that conversation, I still shake my head. I'm not angry, just baffled. Teaching has always been a balance between empathy and accountability, but moments like that make it clear how tricky that balance can be. That story wraps up here. That kind of attitude is hard to process, especially when the effort isn't even being attempted. It almost feels like the rules of hard work and patience are invisible to some people. At the same time, it's kind of eye-opening, because it shows how differently people can approach the same situation. It leaves you wondering how many teachers or coworkers out there have had similar run-ins. This next story is about someone who landed their first full-time job after an internship, only to lose it when surgery forced them to ask for medical leave before even starting. So this happened not too long ago, and honestly, I'm still processing it. I was in my final year of college, balancing classes and a remote internship at the same time. That internship had been going really well. I've been putting in solid work, getting good feedback, and for the first time in a while, I felt like I was building momentum in my career. The best part came when they offered me a full-time position after graduation. I can't even explain how good it felt. Like all the late nights, the effort, and the stress had finally paid off. I remember the excitement of telling my parents, and the relief of knowing I wouldn't have to start from scratch with job hunting after school. It felt secure, like I had this foundation waiting for me as soon as I stepped out into the working world. But then life, being life, threw me a curveball at the worst possible time. Not long before my official joining date, I had to undergo surgery. It wasn't something I could put off or avoid, and as much as I wanted to just push through it, my doctor made it clear that relocating immediately wasn't safe. To make things even more complicated, my parents were against me moving too soon while I was still in recovery. So, stuck between wanting to do the job and needing to heal, I figured the middle ground was to ask if I could start remotely until I was strong enough to relocate. I thought it was a reasonable request. After all, the internship had been remote, and I'd already shown that I could deliver results without being physically in the office. I expected some back and forth, maybe a conversation about timelines or adjustments. What I didn't expect was the reaction I got. When I brought it up to my boss, her response was cold, not just cautious or hesitant, straight up disappointed. She told me she was let down, and almost immediately, I was removed from all the ongoing projects I had been part of. That hurt more than I expected. It was like overnight, I went from being a valued team member to someone who no longer belonged. Then came the final blow. The offer, the one that had made me feel so secure, just quietly disappeared. No official announcement, no big conversation. It just never moved forward. One day I was preparing for my first real job, and the next, it was gone. It was crushing. This was supposed to be my first full-time role, my entry point into adulthood and independence. Instead, I was left jobless, recovering from surgery and replaying the whole situation in my head, wondering what I could have done differently. Should I have just kept quiet and tried to push through relocating while still healing? Was it naive to expect flexibility in a situation like this? I keep asking myself those questions. Maybe this is just how the corporate world works. Cold, unforgiving, and with no room for personal setbacks. Or maybe I just had bad luck with the company I was dealing with. Either way, it was a harsh introduction to the reality of working life. Looking back now, I'm still bitter, still confused, and honestly, a little scared about what the future holds. I didn't think I'd have to learn such a brutal lesson before I even started my first job. That story stops there. That's such a rough way to start out, especially when someone's just trying to balance health with opportunity. It makes the whole thing feel so unfair. Like effort and loyalty suddenly don't matter when circumstances change. The cold reaction really says more about the company than the person in that spot. It leaves this lingering reminder of how fragile job security can be. This next story is about a wife who discovered her husband secretly applied for jobs in California, even though they had agreed to wait until their debts were paid off. So for a little context, my husband and I took a trip to California last October. He's originally from there and still has family in the area. I've always liked the state too, so it's not like I'm against living there someday. But from the start, I've been very clear. Before we make such a big move, we need to pay off our cars and clear up the small loans hanging over us. Basically, I wanted us to be debt-free before uprooting our lives. A couple months before that trip, he asked how I'd feel if he applied to some jobs down there. I told him again the same thing I'd been saying. We need to handle our financial responsibilities first. He seemed to agree every time we talked about it. On top of that, the company he already works for has a branch in California, so if he really wanted to transfer later, that option was there. Fast forward to this month. We take another week-long trip to California, and it's a good trip overall. When we get home, the very next day, I overhear him on the phone with a friend. His friend casually asks, "So how did that interview go?" And my stomach just dropped. Interview? What interview? I hadn't heard a single word about him applying anywhere, and as far as I knew, he was secure in his current job. The moment the word interview came out, he quickly took the call off speaker and made sure I couldn't hear anything else. That alone set off alarms in my head. I didn't push it right away, but the thought just kept nagging me. A few days later, I looked through his phone to see if I could find anything. Nothing on Indeed. No job applications saved. No reminders. No emails. Except, I noticed there was a 3-day gap where all of his emails had been deleted. Those exact 3 days lined up with when this supposed interview was supposed to have happened. The next morning, I asked him about it directly. That's when he told me his version of events. He said the interview was supposed to be a surprise for me. The plan, according to him, was that if he got the job, he could spring it on me like, "Well, surprise, we can actually move here now because I already have a job lined up." He claimed the date had been switched last minute to the same day we left California, so he couldn't actually attend. But hearing that didn't make me feel good. It made me feel betrayed. Because to set that surprise up, he had to delete emails, hide things, and at some point he would have needed to lie straight to my face about where he was going. And beyond all that, we had agreed, mutually, that we wouldn't even consider moving until our debts were paid off. I tried to explain all this to him calmly. I told him how disrespected I felt, how it looked like he went behind my back, and how it seemed like he was prioritizing his own plan instead of the one we had built together. His reaction was explosive. He shouted at me, saying things like, "Oh, my bad for trying to get a better job and give us a better life." My bad for wanting to surprise you with more money. He just kept repeating that line over and over, like I was being ungrateful for him even trying. This morning, the argument flared up again. I told him again why I felt the way I did. That's when he dropped the line that hit me the hardest. He said, "You could tell anybody and they'd agree with me. Sure, your friends might side with you, but anyone else would think you're being dramatic and overreacting. And now, here I am, second guessing myself and wondering if I'm really overreacting or if it actually was crossing a line for him to do all of this behind my back." That's where this story finishes. That's such a frustrating spot to be in because it's less about the job and more about the trust that got shaken. The whole surprise excuse feels flimsy when hiding things and deleting emails was involved. Arguments that circle back to yelling usually end up leaving both people feeling unheard. And when someone insists that everyone would agree with me, it kind of says they're not willing to even hear another perspective. This next story is about someone who accidentally wandered into the wrong event and ended up crashing a wedding reception. A couple weeks ago, I got invited to my friend's cousin's engagement party. It was being held at this event hall I'd never been to before. So when I showed up, I just followed the sound of music and walked into the first big room that looked like the right place. Right away, people started greeting me like I belonged there. Folks were smiling, giving me hugs, handing me drinks, and asking how I knew the couple. My brain completely froze. And without thinking, I just said, "college." That one simple word seemed to satisfy everyone because they all nodded like it made perfect sense. After a few minutes though, I started noticing something felt a little off. The decorations were way more elaborate than I was expecting. The lighting, the flowers, the suits, the dresses. It all seemed a bit too much for just an engagement party. But everyone was treating me like family, so I didn't question it too hard. Then came the moment of truth. As I sat at a table, one older guy leaned over, introduced himself as someone's uncle, and started sharing family stories like we were long-lost relatives. He talked about vacations, old arguments, and even let a few secrets slip. Meanwhile, I just nodded and laughed along like I'd been part of this family my whole life. That's when it hit me. I wasn't at an engagement party. I was smack in the middle of an actual wedding reception. Two strangers had just gotten married, and somehow, I had become part of their big day. At that point, though, it felt way too late to correct anyone. I already had food in front of me and a drink in hand, so I just decided to roll with it. And honestly, the food was incredible. The highlight, though, was the cake. Someone came over, pressed a plate into my hands, and told me I had to try Aunt Linda's famous recipe. I had never heard of Aunt Linda in my entire life, but I can confirm she knows how to bake. That cake was unreal. I ended up staying longer than I should have, just blending into the background. I laughed, I ate, I even clapped during the speeches like I belonged there. The only thing I avoided was getting too close to the bride and groom, because I had no clue what to say if they asked who I was. Eventually, I decided I needed to make my exit before things got awkward. Right before the bouquet toss, I slipped out as quietly as I could. Then I finally found the real engagement party, which was happening in the hall next door. When I walked in, my friend asked why I was late, and I just shrugged and said, "Traffic." No way was I admitting I had just been celebrating with a totally different family. To this day, I can't help but laugh when I think about it. Somewhere out there, a married couple probably has a set of wedding photos with me in the background. Just a random stranger holding a slice of cake and trying to look like I belonged. That's the end of this story. Honestly, that sounds like the kind of mix-up that becomes a core memory. Imagine flipping through wedding photos years later and seeing a stranger casually chilling with cake. It's kind of funny how easily someone can blend into a family gathering when everyone's in a good mood. The best part is they'll probably never know, unless one of those relatives points out, "Hey, who even was that guy?" This next story is about a couple settling into their new apartment, only to find themselves dealing with a neighbor whose nonstop blasting music turns daily life into chaos. My fiance and I moved into our new apartment on August 22nd, and right from the moment we got the keys, things started going downhill. Within minutes of stepping inside, our downstairs neighbor began blasting music so loud that the floors in our unit were shaking. At first, I thought maybe it was a one-off thing, like maybe she was celebrating or just having a rough day. But the music didn't stop. It went on for hours, carrying late into the night and even spilling over into the next day. It was so intense that the assistant manager came by to check it out for themselves. They could hear and feel it too. Calls and emails to her went completely ignored, and the only time the noise actually stopped was when we called the non-emergency line. That should have been my first clue that this wasn't going to be a quick or easy fix. Since then, it's been happening daily. I work from home, which makes it so much worse because I don't get a break from it. I can hear it through headphones, through earplugs, even when I try to distract myself. The vibrations are the worst part. They roll through the floor and up through my desk. At one point, I even bought a thick desk mat to try and dampen it, but it made no difference. Between her bass and the natural rattle of our old AC unit, which we can't shut off in the Texas heat, I've been stuck in this constant state of sensory overload. And it's not just annoying. The vibrations actually make me feel sick. Imagine trying to work while your floor shakes under you. The walls thrum like they're alive, and you can't escape it even if you block out the sound. That's what it's like every single day. We've kept track of everything too. We've got proof, recordings, video from our Ring camera. Even a Walmart delivery driver commented on how insanely loud it was when they dropped off groceries. We've complained to the office daily. The best they've offered is moving us to another unit in the same building. But honestly, why should we have to move when we're the ones following the lease rules? She's the one breaking them. Yesterday was the worst it's ever been. From 5 p.m. to 10 p.m., it was nonstop. We called non-emergency twice. At one point, she actually left to dodge the cops, then came back and slammed her door so hard, it knocked a picture off our wall and broke the frame. Her music blasts during office hours too, right across the street from the management office. She only ever shuts it off if she spots staff walking over. And the crazy part? There's even an on-site security officer here, but somehow nothing is being done. We've started house hunting because this is no way to live, but we don't want to rush into a purchase just because of one neighbor. Moving in with family isn't an option either. So for now, we're just stuck. I'm exhausted, frustrated, and honestly confused about how someone can get away with this without a single lease violation. For context, I'm 33. My fiancé is 30. We're not loud people. He games occasionally with friends, maybe once or twice a week, and I'm usually quiet during work hours since I work from home. I don't even start making noise until late in the afternoon when I'm cooking dinner or cleaning. This whole thing has made me realize just how much one neighbor can completely throw off the peace of a home. That's where the story ends. It's crazy how quickly one bad neighbor can turn what should have been an exciting new chapter into something exhausting. The whole door slamming so hard a picture falls off part really says it all. Sometimes it feels like apartment living is just rolling the dice on who ends up around you. I think anyone who's been through it knows how draining it can get when the walls and floors don't protect you from the chaos. This next story is about someone who thought they were using the bathroom normally, only to realize way too late that they were hogging the only stall in a bar, while someone else desperately waited outside. Last night, my friend Ifa came up from Dublin to cheer me up. She stayed in the spare room, and we decided to hit a few bars together. By the time we made our way to the lodge, it was already around 4 in the morning. That place has just one cubicle big enough for me to fit in with my walking stick, so that's where I headed when nature called. At this point, I needed to pee badly, like uncomfortably badly. I got Aoife settled in, made sure the guys nearby knew to leave her alone since she's stunning and gets hit on constantly, and then I made my way to the bathroom. I went in, shut the door, and finally started to relieve myself. Everything felt fine at first. I've got some nerve damage, so I usually listen to the sound of myself peeing as the way to know when I'm finished. A couple of minutes into it though, someone started pounding on the door. They were desperate, yelling that they had awful diarrhea and needed me to hurry up. I shouted back that I was almost done, but I didn't want to cut things short. I thought I still had more to go. 5 minutes later, I was still standing there. At about the 10-minute mark, it hit me. Something wasn't right. I remember thinking, there's no way I've been peeing this long. This is inhuman. That's when I realized the horrifying truth. The sound I'd been relying on wasn't me peeing at all. It was the toilet itself making noise. I froze, piecing it all together. For who knows how long, I hadn't actually been peeing. I had just been standing there in the only bathroom stall, convinced everything was fine, while this poor person outside was clenching and begging to be let in. Finally, I forced myself to stop, slammed my knees together, and confirmed that the noise kept going. That toilet betrayed me. It was the one making the sound the whole time. I opened the door as quickly as I could, muttered a rushed apology, but the woman didn't even seem to hear me. She sprinted past me into the stall with a kind of urgent waddle that leaves no doubt about what's about to happen. I didn't stick around to see how it ended. Honestly, I think she made the mistake of trying those sketchy tuna sandwiches from the Maxall station up the road. Looking back, I can only laugh at the absurdity of it. Between my neuro damage, which makes me rely on sound cues, and the cursed toilet making those noises, it was like the perfect storm for one of the most awkward bathroom fails of my life. That story wraps up here. That one is both funny and brutal at the same time. Standing there for 10 minutes thinking everything was fine while chaos was building outside, that's a tough spot. The toilet making fake noises almost feels like it set the whole thing up. Honestly, the mental image of someone sprinting past without a word makes it even more awkward. This next story is about someone who accidentally got mistaken for staff at a historic event and ended up with free admission and perks they never expected. This happened more than 10 years ago, but it's one of those memories that still sticks with me. There's a place called Mount Vernon, George Washington's old estate, and every year they put on this holiday event called Christmas by Candlelight. The whole place gets decorated the way it would have looked back in Washington's time. Instead of electric lights, everything is glowing with candles and lanterns, and it gives the place this warm, timeless feel. Now, the event isn't free. Normally you need a ticket, and they sell out quickly. Sometimes you can get lucky with last-minute openings, but you can't really count on it. That year I was working nearby and thought, why not swing by after work and at least try to get in? I didn't have high hopes, but it was worth a shot. I didn't even think about the fact that I was still wearing my work badge on a lanyard around my neck. It wasn't anything fancy, just a standard ID badge with a photo and the company logo. But as I walked up to the entrance, something unexpected happened. The person at admission waved me through without even asking for a ticket. No hesitation, no questions, just a simple nod as if everything was in order. At first I was confused, but figured maybe I got lucky with a mix-up. Then I wandered over to the refreshments tent. They handed me a steaming cup of hot cider and, to my surprise, gave me a couple of extra cookies with a smile, like I was someone special. I remember standing there with my drink, looking around at the candlelit estate, wondering how I managed to slip in so easily. The night went on, and I ended up with a group touring the mansion. To make things even stranger, I got chosen to be the one who led the group into the house. They told me I'd be presenting our visitor credentials to Martha Washington, who was being played by one of the costumed actors. I didn't argue. I just went with it, playing along, even though I felt totally out of place. By the time the tour wrapped up, I was getting ready to leave and maybe grab a souvenir from the gift shop. But before I could head out, someone stopped me. They said, "Hey, we need you to go back and escort the next group." I froze for a second, completely caught off guard. I tried to explain, I don't actually work here. The person just looked at me, surprised, and pointed to the badge hanging around my neck. That's when it hit me. They thought I was staff the entire time. That badge made me look official enough to get free admission, free refreshments, extra cookies, and even a small roll in the evening. In the end, I just laughed it off. I wasn't in period clothes, I definitely wasn't on the payroll, but thanks to a simple mistake, I got one of the most unique nights at Mount Vernon I could have asked for. That's the end of this story. That's actually pretty hilarious. Just walking in with a random badge and suddenly you're part of the event staff. That's some unplanned luck. The extra cookies were probably the best part though. It's funny how small details like a lanyard can change the whole way people see you. This next story is about a homeowner locked in a running battle with an ant colony, using a half-remembered family DIY trick that accidentally turned into an all-you-can-drink bar for insects. I grew up thinking jar lids and pantry supplies could solve just about anything. My dad had this classic summer ritual. He'd set out shallow lids with a mix of water and boric acid, tuck in a little square of sponge, and tell me we were outsmarting the scouts. It felt like campcraft more than pest control. He'd explain in that patient kitchen table way that the trick only worked if the ants carried it home. They need to think it's food, he'd say. Sugar makes the trip worth it. Somewhere between childhood and a creaky first apartment, I lost that last sentence. I remembered the lids. I remembered the boric acid. I even remembered the sponge cut to size so those tiny feet had a landing pad. But the sugar? For the longest time, I left it out. Part of me worried it would just invite an ant convention across the counters. Part of me thought the simpler mix still worked, just slower. like a gentle nudge instead of a hammer. So every summer, like clockwork, I'd refill the same lids and watch the ants belly up to the shallow rim, sipping, then wander off in neat little lines. I'd tell myself, after a week of refills, that the colony must be on its last legs. Any day now. Just needed a little more patience. To give you an idea of the scene, picture a quiet kitchen at the tail end of a warm day. The house hums softly. Fridge, a clock, some distant traffic. Then, almost like the air has a glitch, a line forms from a baseboard seam. Ants, single file, committing to a plan they clearly discussed in tiny board meetings. I'd set the jar lids down with the care of plating appetizers. The liquid would glint under the light, and the little sponge would swell, giving them this tidy bar top to lean on. I'd watch them arrive like regulars, hesitant at first, then comfortable, then bold. It became a routine I could run on autopilot. Refill, replace, wipe the counter, refill again. After a while, I started giving the whole thing a nickname in my head. Bartender duty. The crowd never got rowdy. They just kept coming. I convinced myself the boric acid alone was doing its slow, methodical work, like a strategy game that takes turns days apart. The thing about routines is they can make nonsense feel normal. When the lids went dry, I filled them again without thinking. When the line shifted to a second counter, I added a second lid like a bar expansion. I told myself it was containment. Looking back on it now, it was customer service. Then last night, the ants picked up the tempo. 2 counters. A handful of scouts turned into a small parade, and my comfortable little fiction snapped a bit. After a while, I heard my dad's voice from years ago. Sugar makes the trip worth it. And I finally stopped arguing with common sense. I made a tiny syrup, stirred it into the boric acid and water mix, and set new lids like I should have been doing the whole time. It took 5 minutes, maybe less. I wiped down the trails, turned off the kitchen light, and told myself I'd check in the morning. Morning hit like a page flip. The counters were quiet. The little seams by the baseboards were empty. No moving specks, no choreography. The jar lids sat there like evidence of a magic trick I couldn't recreate. It wasn't just fewer ants. It was none. The line, the bar, the tiny regulars, gone. I stood there with a sponge in my hand and realized what I'd been doing all this time. I hadn't been starving a colony. I'd been hydrating it. I was the friendly neighborhood tap, serving a strange bitter tonic with no reason to haul it home. I kept thinking about quinine, that tonic water bite. Maybe the boric mix without sugar tasted weird but interesting, like a novelty drink. Maybe the ants were coming for the ambiance. The reliable puddle, the non-stick landing pad, the piece of a low, bright kitchen at midnight. I pictured myself polishing the lids like barware and flipping the little sponge like a coaster. It would be funny if it hadn't been so, well, effective once I finally did it right. There was this tiny ache in my chest that surprised me. Not guilt exactly, but a tug. After a while, even pests feel like characters in the same book. I could recognize the exact spot where the line appeared each evening. I knew their tempo after rain. I learned how the trail paused when the fridge kicked on, like they were listening. And then, in one night, the story ended. The kitchen felt still. Cleaner, sure, but also a little emptier. To be clear, ants in the house are not cute when they reach the bread or decide the fruit bowl is a theme park. I'm not pretending we signed a treaty. At the same time, I guess I'd spent weeks humanizing them by accident, turning a problem into a ritual, then into a habit, then into a role. Bartender, host, night manager of the world's smallest lounge. And with a spoonful of sugar, I promoted myself to something less poetic, efficient, final. The part of me that loves tidy solutions liked that. The part that reads too much into everything missed the tiny footsteps. After a while, I rinsed the lids, wiped the counters one more time, and put the boric acid away. I told myself I'd remember the full recipe next time before the parade marched in. If there is a next time, I'll do it quick and clean. No more bar hours. No more refills for the regulars. I can still hear my dad's voice explaining the why of it, not just the how. They have to carry it back, he'd say. Otherwise, you're just feeding the line. By late afternoon, the kitchen had settled back into plain old kitchen sounds. Spoon in a mug, tap dripping once, the low purr of the fridge. I made coffee and stared at the baseboards a little too long, waiting for emotion that never came. The counters felt bigger without that tiny highway. The silence felt earned, part victory, part eulogy. That's pest control, I guess. A quiet house versus a quiet conscience, and a spoonful of science deciding which one wins. That story wraps up here. There's something oddly relatable about turning a hassle into a routine and then realizing the routine was the problem. The bartender image is funny in a gentle way, like a sitcom joke that sneaks up and lands late. Precision beats patience sometimes, and this is one of those times. The quiet kitchen at the end almost steals the scene more than the ants ever did. This next story is about a man who discovered his new girlfriend was a witch, leading to one of the most unusual dating experiences he'd ever had. When I first started dating this girl, everything seemed pretty normal. She was fun, kind, and we got along really well. For one of our dates, I picked her up so we could see a movie at the IMAX theater. We were driving over, making small talk, when she suddenly said, "I have something to tell you." I figured it was going to be something simple, maybe about her job or her family. But instead, she looked straight at me and said, "I'm a witch." At first I thought she was joking, so I gave a quick response. I laughed and said, "No worries, everyone gets a little witchy now and then." She shook her head and told me I misunderstood. She wasn't joking at all. She explained that she was originally from Louisiana, and that not only was she a witch, but so were her mother and grandmother. I had no experience with anything like this, so my head was buzzing with questions. Instead of going to the movie, she asked if I wanted to just come back to her apartment so she could explain things better. I agreed, since I was curious and honestly wanted to know more. Up until that point, we had always hung out at my place. She'd come over and play with my black cat, Velcro, who I jokingly called Velcro the Wonder Cat. This was the first time she actually invited me into her space. The moment I stepped inside, it felt different. Right by the door, leaning against the wall, was a broom that looked like it came out of a movie set. The handle had strange symbols burned into the wood, like something meant for ritual use. Then in the living room, she had a small table set up like an altar. On top of it were items I didn't recognize. Candles, jars, maybe some herbs. And right above it hung several large pictures of Jesus. The mix of spiritual objects was surprising, but she explained that her beliefs weren't what most people assumed. She started telling me about Wicca, and how it wasn't tied to anything dark or connected to Satan, like movies or old stereotypes make people think. It was more about energy, respect, and balance. After she explained, she got very direct and asked me if I still wanted to keep seeing her, now that I knew. I told her yes, because at that point I really did like her and didn't see a reason not to. Things progressed that night. We started getting intimate, and before long, clothes were scattered all over her bedroom. In the moment, everything was exciting and fun, until I asked her to turn over. When she did, I suddenly froze. Covering her back was a massive tattoo of Jesus. It wasn't a small design either. It took up a huge portion of her back. My reaction was immediate. I asked her to turn back over. She was confused and asked me why, and I had to be honest. I said, "I really don't want Jesus watching what I'm trying to do here." It already felt like he was watching from the altar in the other room, and now there he was staring from her back. It was just too much for me in the moment. Despite that awkward night, we kept seeing each other for a while. Things were good between us overall, but eventually our schedules started clashing too much. I worked late into the night, sometimes until 3 or 4 in the morning, while she was a nurse and had a much stricter routine. It became hard to line things up, and she was the one who decided to end the relationship. There was one last detail, though. She had always loved my cat, Velcro. Since witches and black cats are basically iconic together, I gave Velcro to her when things ended. It felt fitting somehow, like the cat was meant to be with her. That's the end of this story. That story definitely had a mix of humor and surprise packed into it. The tattoo moment feels like something straight out of a comedy movie. The way it ended with the cat actually kind of tied the whole thing together in a weirdly perfect way. It's one of those stories that just sticks in your head for how unusual it all is. This next story is about a Fairground breakup where a corn dog, a butter sculpture, and one poorly timed speech collide in a messy split. County Fair night had that warm, sticky air that feels like caramel on the skin, the kind that clings to clothes and turns every light bulb into a little halo. We rolled in just before sunset, joking about how we were suddenly outdoorsy because we could see grass between the gravel and the funnel cake stand. It felt easy, the kind of evening that makes a person believe in small-town magic. String lights, dusty boots, and music bleeding out of tinny speakers near the Ferris wheel. We started with food because that's the fair's real main event. He pointed at the first stand and grinned. Corn dogs. So we stood in line, heat rising off the fryer, watching batter-dipped everything come out golden and dripping. I went all in on a lemonade the size of a small aquarium, the kind served in a cup with a ridiculous plastic straw that arches like a question mark. He went for the corn dog with the extra mustard, then talked me into curly fries that rustled like straw in the paper boat. We wandered, tried to act like we weren't already a little winded from the walk from the parking lot, and poked fun at ourselves for pretending we were the type to ride the big swings without looking down. At first, the jokes came easy. He pointed out a butter sculpture that looked suspiciously like Elvis, hip-cocked, curl-perfect, a sheen that caught the lamplight. We laughed and I took a photo, angled just right so the glow looked almost holy. Every smell tried to claim the moment. Kettle corn, hot oil, hay, a little whiff of animals from the show barn. Music floated over from a cover band doing old classics, and I recognized a chorus or two without placing the song. It was the kind of night where everything blends. Sugar on the tongue, grit under shoes, colored bulbs humming overhead. We walked past the game alley, where the barkers call out soft deals that somehow sound like challenges. He tossed a couple of rings at milk bottles, and I clapped, even though the rings bounced every time and the bottles never rattled. I tried to win a stuffed bear by popping balloons with dull darts. The worker gave me a pity smile and one extra throw that still sailed wide. We kept moving, bumping shoulders, sharing the curly fries down to the smallest oniony curls, licking salt from our fingers like it was part of the ritual. It was halfway through his corn dog that the air changed. Not the weather, just us. A shift small enough to feel like a pause in the song. He set his jaw like a person who just remembered a dentist appointment. Then he looked at me, and it wasn't the goofy smile from 5 minutes before. He said, "We need to talk." Fairground noise doesn't stop for statements like that. Somewhere, a kid shriek-laughed on a spinning ride. Someone shouted, "Win a goldfish." A generator coughed. My lemonade felt suddenly heavy in my hand, the cup sweating hard enough to make my palms slick. I tried to find a quiet spot with my eyes, but everything was bright and loud and spinning. He started with the classic lines. "We're just in different places." He held the stick like a baton that might explain the rest if he waved it right. "You want certain things. I think I want different things. Words that feel like they belong in a hallway or a parked car, not in front of a statue of butter with sideburns, not while powdered sugar floats through the air like gentle snow." To give an idea of how surreal it felt, there I was 2 feet from him, trying not to cry, staring at a food stand menu where everything was spelled out in all caps, like it could shout sense into the moment. Funnel cake, elephant ear, corn dogs, lemonade. The woman at the counter behind him sprinkled sugar on a fresh cake, and the cloud drifted between us like a stage effect I hadn't asked for. He tried to keep going, but the sentences stumbled. "You're great. That kind of talk always tries to be kind and always lands sideways." I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, fixed my eyes on the little constellation of grease spots on the paper under his corn dog, and inhaled slow until the lemon acid cut through the heat. I didn't trust my voice, so I didn't use it. I let the fair speak for me. The tinny guitar, the laughter, the grind of a ride ratcheting up, up, up. He kept talking, and I let him. Sometimes silence is the only reply that isn't a trap. Then came the moment that cracked me up later, after the sting dulled. He held out the last half of his funnel cake like a peace offering. Powdered sugar drifted off in little ghosts. "Do you want the rest?" he asked, almost gentle, eyes apologetic, voice soft like napkins. I took it because some things simply make sense. Heartbreak fades. Sugar is reliable. The plate felt warm through the paper, and I pinched off a corner that crunched before it melted, and that helped. Not to fix anything big, but to give the hands something to do besides tremble. We stood there in the glow of food stall bulbs, the conversation pausing in strange places, all the big words already spent. He shifted, uncertain, as if waiting for me to yell or cry or announce a verdict. I wasn't ready to do any of that in front of Elvis, so I wiped sugar on my fingers and said the simplest truth available. "Okay, not agreement, not approval. Just the word that unlocks the next step. Move." After a few long beats, we drifted apart inside the crowd. No dramatic exit, no running footsteps, just two people becoming atoms again, bumping into strangers with plastic cups and paper plates, letting the fair absorb the leftover noise. The music changed. The ride kept spinning. The world didn't know to stop. I wandered without a plan. Funnel cake in one hand, lemonade in the other, sticky enough to feel like a kid again. After a while, the ache in my chest made room for something else. The lights looked less like glare and more like confetti. The band hit a chorus I actually knew, and I hummed along under my breath. I walked past the Butter Elvis one more time and laughed. It felt silly and perfect. I took a breath that tasted like fried dough and citrus, wiped sugar off my shirt, and kept going. Later, the Ferris wheel called me over like a lighthouse. The line moved slow. I watched the gondolas lift and circle, tiny couples and families rising and sinking in smooth loops. When it was my turn, I stepped in alone, sat back, and let the sky tilt. The fair shrank to a toy set, dots of light, lines of color, the sound bending into one big hush. Up at the top, for a second, the car paused and I felt weightless. Not from the height, but from the idea that slammed down a minute before. I let the breeze slap at the sugar on my lips. I let my shoulders drop. I let the word okay settle into something stronger. When my feet touched ground again, I picked a little more sugar off the paper and laughed at how ridiculous and sweet and utterly human the whole night had been. I tossed the empty cup, brushed my hands clean, and walked out sticky, single, and, weirdly, lighter. Not because this was the plan, because sometimes plans crack open and let something simple through, like the taste of powdered sugar refusing to be ruined. That's where the story ends. Breakups that happen in the brightest places hit different, but there's a tiny comfort in all that noise and light. The Butter Elvis cameo is honestly unforgettable. Funnel cake as a consolation prize feels oddly perfect, like the fair knew what it was doing. Sometimes the exit isn't dramatic. It's just a quiet, okay, and that's enough to keep walking. This next story is about a low-key night out that spirals into a confrontation when a kid grabs a stranger's knitting yarn and a defensive parent turns it into a scene. The plan for the night was simple. My sister invited me to a musical evening at a local pizzeria where her boyfriend was playing, and I said yes immediately. I love live music, but I'm the kind of person who needs a little something to do with my hands when the activity is mostly sitting and listening. So I packed a small project bag. Nothing dramatic, just 3 skeins of yarn that fit neatly in the bottom, and the one I'd be working with tucked on top. The yarn was set aside for a specific pattern I'd been excited about, counted and planned down to the last meter. We got there a little early. The pizzeria had that warm, cozy buzz, pizza ovens humming, the faint scorched sweet smell of crust, and a mix of conversation under the ripple of tuning notes. We found a table off to the side of the small stage. The lighting was soft, the kind that turns everything a little golden. I slid my bag under the chair, pulled out my needles, and started into the easy rhythm of the first section. Knit, knit, purl. Slide, breathe, listen. It was nice. The music started, gentle, bright, and I felt myself settle. There were families around us, which I didn't mind. Kids were wiggling in their seats, sharing slices, sneaking sips of soda. Every so often, a little pair of sneakers would hurry by toward the bathroom or the arcade machine against the wall. I kept my yarn in my lap, the working skein feeding smooth as I counted repeats in my head. The other skeins stayed zipped in the bag. At least that's what I thought. After a while, the music pulled me in. My stitch count stayed steady, and my eyes relaxed, tracking the pattern almost on muscle memory. I wasn't guarding the bag. I didn't think I needed to. And then, in that casual sweep people do, phone, napkin, water, bag, I glanced down. Something in my stomach dropped. The bag zipper was open, and one of the skeins that should have been nestled there was gone. I looked around. At first, I didn't even see yarn, just shoes and chair legs and the glint of crumbs. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw it. My missing skein had been pulled out, trailed, and rolled. It slithered from under our table, looped around a chair leg, and disappeared toward the next table, where a little tangle of color sat mashed into the floor. The strand had picked up everything on its trip: dust, gray fuzz, hair, and a fresh coat of pizza crumb confetti. My heart sank in that quiet way that feels heavy rather than loud. I followed the trail with my eyes and then turned. A small boy, maybe 4 or 5, sat in the next chair over, looking at the mess like it was a fascinating new creature. He still had a bit of the yarn in his hand. I took a breath, another breath, and I leaned down to his level so my voice wouldn't carry. I asked, as calmly as I could, "Hey, did you take that yarn out of my bag?" He looked at me and nodded. Simple. Straightforward. The kind of honest a little kid has before they learn to decorate answers. I kept my voice steady and said, "That yarn is mine. It came from my bag. Please don't go through other people's things." I added something I hoped would make sense to him. That was one of my toys, and now it's ruined, and I'm really upset. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't snap, but I was absolutely shaking. Part frustration, part disappointment, at the thought of losing a planned skein to the restaurant floor. That was the moment his mother turned toward me. She was already frowning. The first words out of her mouth came out sharp. She told me I had no business bringing yarn to a restaurant. She said I was being entitled for speaking to her child. She said children were going to act like children, and the rest of the world should be patient. The room didn't go quiet, but it felt like it did. The music kept playing, the oven kept roaring, but my attention tunneled right into that one corner of air between the three of us. I tried to explain, still in a regular tone, that the skein had been in my bag, not on the table, that it was counted for a project, that it was now covered in whatever lives on a restaurant floor. I mentioned that I'd asked her son a question, and he had said he did take it. The more I explained, the more her face tightened. She didn't want reasons. She wanted me to back away. She told me again that I shouldn't have brought knitting, that the world needed to make room for kids, and that my feelings were over the top. For a second, I thought about digging in, about laying out the quiet math of it, that my bag is not a community toy box. That curiosity doesn't erase boundaries, that I hadn't scolded in a way that would embarrass him. I had just named what happened and asked for it to stop. But standing there with a ruined skein threading across tile like a sad pastel river, I realized the conversation wasn't going to land anywhere useful. So I shifted gears. I bent down, gathered what strands I could, and wound them into a little defeated lump. The fibers were matted from dust and grit, and there was no saving that texture. The more I touched it, the clearer it got. This one was done. I tucked the lump into a spare bag I used for scraps, zipped my main bag completely, and slid it to the safe side of my chair. My hands needed something to do, so I took a slow drink of water and counted to 10 in my head, steady as a metronome. My sister put a gentle hand on my arm, a small anchor, and asked if I wanted to step outside. I didn't. I wanted to enjoy the music I'd come to hear and finish the row I was on. So I sat back down, refound my place in the pattern, and let my needles do the calming I couldn't quite do by thinking. Knit, knit, purl. The stage lights made a soft cone. The melody threaded through the room. The night moved on. I finished the section I'd planned to finish. I kept my project bag fully zipped, and I let the rest of the evening be quiet for me. No more conversation than necessary, no extra commentary, just a steady rhythm and a decision to protect what I had left. On the way home, I mentally reordered what I'd need to replace and when I could swing it. The yarn had been meant for something I was genuinely excited about. That stung, but the project could wait, and my piece for the night didn't have to go with it. Looking back on it now, I'm glad I kept my words measured in the moment. I'm also allowed to admit I was really upset and not pretend I wasn't. Both of those things can be true at the same time. That story wraps up here. Public spaces get interesting when personal boundaries meet totally different expectations. The whole scene says a lot about how fast a small moment can snowball. Handwork at shows and concerts is such a calm habit, and it's wild how quickly that calm can get rattled. The music trying to smooth things over in the background feels almost cinematic, like the soundtrack didn't get the memo. This next story is about a teenager who, in the middle of one of their hardest days, suddenly realized their teacher saw them as more than just another student. Last week was rough. Honestly, it felt like everything decided to fall apart all at once. The morning started with me flunking my driver's test, which already set the tone for the rest of the day. I walked out of that testing center feeling like a total failure, fighting back frustration and wondering how I was ever going to pass. On top of that, I had a fight with my best friend that left me feeling off balance. By the time I dragged myself into AP chemistry, I was already completely drained. Chemistry is one of those classes that eats away at me even on good days. Balancing equations feels like translating some impossible language, and when I'm distracted, it's even worse. That day, I sat at my desk just trying to keep my head above water, telling myself to at least look like I was paying attention. I thought if I stayed quiet and didn't draw attention to myself, the day would just end without more damage. But when the bell rang, my teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, asked me to stay after class. My stomach dropped. I figured she was about to tell me off for zoning out, or maybe she'd noticed my grades slipping. I braced myself for some lecture I didn't have the energy to handle. Instead, she looked at me carefully and just said, "Hey, are you all right? You're acting different today." That simple question hit me harder than I expected. It was like a crack in a wall I'd been holding up all day. I broke down crying, right there in the classroom, in front of a teacher I'd only ever seen as this professional figure who handed out assignments and wrote grades on tests. I felt embarrassed at first, but she didn't make it weird. She didn't tell me to toughen up or act like my problems weren't real. She just quietly handed me a box of tissues and waited. And then she shared something that completely shifted how I saw her. She told me that when she was my age, she failed her driver's test not once, not twice, but 3 times. She said she cried in the parking lot every single time. Hearing that floored me. I had never even considered that teachers had stories like mine. Failures, disappointments, moments where they felt small. We ended up talking for nearly 20 minutes, but not about school or homework or college. We talked about life. She told me about her own teenage years and how chaotic they felt. She admitted there was a point in her master's program where she nearly dropped out because she didn't feel smart enough. She even said that to this day, she still calls her mom on bad days. It was like she pulled back the curtain and let me see the real person behind the teacher role. That conversation completely rewired how I thought about her. Up until then, I honestly thought teachers were kind of like machines, grading papers, assigning projects, existing in this bubble that didn't touch real life. But listening to her open up made me realize she chose to spend her days with kids like me, trying to help us through not just academics, but also the mess of being a teenager. Later that evening, I got a text from her just checking in to see if I was okay. I didn't even know teachers did that, but it made me feel like she truly cared. Not because it was her job, but because she wanted to. And in that moment, Mrs. Rodriguez stopped being just my chemistry teacher. She became someone real to me. Someone I respected not just for teaching science, but for being human in a way I didn't expect. That's the end of this story. Moments like that really stick. It's wild how just one honest conversation can flip the way someone's seen. Teachers usually feel so distant, but when they let their guard down, they suddenly become people who've been through the same messy stuff. That shift can be small, but it leaves a mark. This next story is about a sibling standoff where one brother keeps accidentally eating someone else's food until a sabotaged ice cream pint turns the fridge into a quiet battleground. My brother and I share a small place with one medium fridge, one freezer, and exactly 0 patience when it comes to leftovers. He's got this talent for not noticing labels, Sharpie warnings, or the fact that a half-eaten bag of chips is clearly not up for grabs. If I left a slice of pizza in a box with my name on it, it's somehow teleported into his stomach by the next morning. If I opened a soda, took 2 sips, and set it on the top shelf, I'd find it mysteriously empty and back in the fridge like a little practical joke. At first I tried the obvious fixes. I started writing my name bigger. Then I added dates. Then I started taping sticky notes with little messages like, "Hands off," or "Not for you," or the very calm, "Don't eat this please." He'd still accidentally take it. Whenever I confronted him, he would shrug and say, "Oh man, I thought it was mine." Like our kitchen had some kind of leftover roulette. He always looked a little too satisfied while saying it, like he knew exactly what he did and was proud of himself. I told myself I'd let it go, but the list of tiny losses kept getting longer. The last slice of buffalo chicken pizza I was saving for lunch, gone. A perfect apple, crisp and cold and just washed, vanished. A half bag of the good kettle chips that somehow cost as much as rent, crumbs. It was like living with a very polite raccoon that occasionally said sorry with a mouthful of food. I knew he had a weak spot though. He has a favorite pint of ice cream, salted caramel with fudge swirls, that he treats like a precious treasure. If it goes on sale, he buys one. Just one. It lives in the very back corner of the freezer, behind a bag of frozen peas and a stiff, frosty pack of tortillas nobody remembers buying. He doesn't share it. He would offer me literally anything else before he offered me a spoonful of that pint. He protects it like it's a savings account. One night, I watched him sneak it into the freezer after a grocery run. He slid the pint behind the peas and tapped the lid down twice, like he was sealing a vault. He went to bed early, and I just sat there on the couch thinking about all the food I had lost to oops. I wanted a response that didn't start a fight, didn't escalate into a yelling match, and didn't involve taking something he already paid for. I wanted something small, reversible, and memorable. So I waited until the house was quiet. Then I padded into the kitchen, pulled open the freezer, and gently tugged his pint free from its fortifications. The lid popped off with that soft ice cream sound, and the surface inside looked like a glossy caramel planet. I let it sit on the counter for a few minutes, just enough to soften. Then I took a spoon, a bottle of very salty soy sauce, and a small hot sauce we keep for emergency noodle nights. I added a tablespoon of soy sauce and a generous dash of hot sauce, then stirred slowly so the swirls looked natural. The smell was something. Not enough to notice from a distance, but definitely noticeable if the spoon hit the mouth. I smoothed the top with the back of the spoon and popped the lid back on. Back behind the peas it went. The next day moved along like any other. I made a point to act normal, to keep a straight face, and to not hover in the kitchen like a cartoon villain. In the late afternoon, I heard the freezer door creak open. My brother sighed, his happy ice cream sigh, the one he does when he thinks he's about to be alone with his favorite dessert. I stayed in the living room, flipping channels very casually and pretending to be absorbed in whatever was on. There was the soft pop of the lid, a pause, then a small metallic clink of a spoon scooping, another pause, and then a sound I had never heard him make before. Half cough, half gag, and fully confused. "What in the world is this?" he called from the kitchen. I stood up and walked in, keeping my face as calm as possible. He held the pint like it had insulted him. His eyes were watering a little. "It tastes like soy sauce. And, something else. What's wrong with this?" I leaned in, looked at the pint, and tilted my head. "Bad batch?" I said, like I had never heard of such a thing, like the world had gone strange. He took another cautious try, just to make sure the first bite wasn't a fluke. That second spoonful hit harder. He put the lid back on and set the pint down like it had personally betrayed him. Then he started scraping the mess into the trash, scooping and muttering about quality control and how companies don't make things the way they used to. He even checked the sell-by date and the label, like the answer would be printed there. Meanwhile, I stood there offering neutral commentary. "Weird," I said. "Maybe they stored it next to something in the warehouse." He nodded like that was a theory worth investigating and kept grumbling while he threw it away. After that, nothing more was said. But an interesting shift happened in our kitchen. My food suddenly stayed where I put it. The half-eaten chips were exactly as half-eaten as I left them. The little triangle of leftover pizza, untouched. Even my soda, my clearly labeled soda, sat there all day and greeted me when I got home. He never accused me of anything, and I never confessed. We just carried on like two diplomats who had signed a treaty without talking about it. I didn't need to sabotage anything else. Once was enough. The memory of that pint, the one that tasted like the ocean collided with a chili pepper, seemed to live in his head rent-free. If I caught him glancing at my labeled leftovers, he'd pull his eyes away like he'd looked at the sun. And when he bought his next ice cream pint, he stored it in the front of the freezer like a normal person. No more secret vault, no more treasure hoard, just frozen dessert and boundaries. It wasn't revenge so much as a gentle nudge, a reminder that if someone insists on ignoring lines, the lines can be painted in very bright colors. My snacks survived. His pride survived. The freezer survived. And peace fell over our kitchen like a little snowfall of powdered sugar, without the soy sauce. That's where the story ends. Petty justice like this is oddly satisfying, especially when it convinces someone to respect simple boundaries. The part that lands hardest is how small the fix was compared to the weeks of frustration. Sometimes one careful push changes a whole routine, and hey, snack security restored feels like a tiny win worth celebrating. Anyways, that's gonna wrap it up for today's stories. Hopefully it made for a nice, easy listen. If you had a good time, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Thanks for spending some time here. and I'll catch you in the next one.